Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the AFR EMS case studies. My name is Chris Ortiz. I'm the EMS Division Chief for Albuquerque Fire Rescue, and today I am joined by Lieutenant Justin Spain and Lieutenant Brent Rorick. Welcome, guys. So today we want to talk about a unique case, which was a mountain rescue that both of you were participating in and had some good points to share. So Brent, I'll start with you talking about the dispatch. You were dispatched out to the call. It came in initially, we talked about as a 78 for a potential mountain rescue for a young adult female that was hiking in the foothills.
Mm-hmm. We get the initial dispatch. Pops up on the screen, a 78, possible fall into a crevasse, which kind of threw me off because no way whatsoever were we expecting that. I mean, we're kind of removed from 16s and 8s that, are way more well-versed on that. And just knowing that, is this BS or is this the real thing? What do we need for that? I mean, I never thought that we were going to make that call because there had to have been, other circumstances that were going on. Turns out 16s was on a 9 Echo. They're like 10 minutes into that. They're not going to clear. Had to figure out where 8s was coming from. We also had Squad 2 and the HCR Task Force Dispatch Battalion 3 as well. And, with the offset chance that we were actually going to get that, the potential of being in the mountains was going to be a little bit. We slowed down the crew at that point to at least get some comfortable shoes, something that could help us out, headlamps, warm clothing, beanie, something, if we're going to be up there. Chances are, I was thinking, they tripped and fell and we're going to walk them out, but that definitely wasn't the circumstances. Also, we don't have a litter. We don't have any of the mountain rescue things. So Engine 15, they were a little ahead of us. They stopped by 16s, opened the bay doors, got everything from there. We made our way up to the trailhead itself.
Okay, perfect. And talking about preparing for that mentally, because ultimately you said it's not a call that you would normally go to, 16s and 8s primarily. Yeah. Lieutenant Spain, is there anything that other crews should prepare for in terms of the items that Lieutenant talked about?
Brent covered it pretty well. He's backing up with the task force. We should always have 8s or 16s with Squad 2 on there, which has a litter and wheel as well. And then be prepared yourself. This is not a normal run-of-the-mill call for us, and it's okay to take 20 minutes to make sure the crew can take care of themselves so they can take care of the patient.
Great point.
And as we know here in New Mexico, the weather changes, and it's beautiful days and cold nights, so doing what you guys need to be out there for an average call time out there is about 4 hours. So being ready for that transition, and of course, they almost always come in when night's coming.
Absolutely. Okay, good point. So to that, it was early evening in April. Yeah. So give us a description of what you see when you arrived.
We get to the base of the mountain. Command got set up in the parking lot. And at that point, we had 8s coming. I don't know if Squad was there yet, but Engine 15, Rescue 15 were there and ready. So for the people that didn't have jackets, we took out the liners for their bunkers. We took just a couple more minutes to get more things set up. But then we pretty much had the wilderness backpacks, we had those set up. And so we needed somebody in the canyon that was going to be more of a reliable source of information.
Did you have SAR teams there already when you arrived, or was it strictly AFR crews?
It was only AFR at that point. And, we wanted to make patient contact to make sure that it wasn't just a twisted ankle, that it wasn't, all this. We didn't know how severe it was until we got there.
So you got there, and sounds like you heard somebody screaming, so you knew that's where your patient was. And when
we
you
heard
saw
their
her,
friend screaming.
Okay.
And part of the phone calls that we made in the canyon when we had reception, we were dispatched to Embudito Canyon, but we didn't know if they were near the water, if they were up on the side, if they were bouldering, if they were on the north side, south side, anything like that. And I had to simplify everything to, are you standing in water? Can you see water? If so, where is that to you? And all I said is, follow the canyon, take a right, take a left, you'll see us. And we actually spotted the other callers before we saw them. And then it was voice communication, whistles that are on the packs, things along those lines. Then we kind of narrowed it from there. It was about a mile up, and then, I don't know, 100 yards south on the hillside. And first thing I want to make sure is that I still had radio communication if we needed to set up spotters or relay reporters, relay
repeaters,
from canyons and this and that. But we had a good line of sight, still spotty cell phone communication. Hadn't really seen the patient quite yet because of her predicament where she was. So we kind of held off on SARS and things along those lines until we could see if we could actually get her out.
So now the initial report that she may have been stuck in a crevice in the rocks, and is that exactly what you saw when you finally got eyes on the patient?
What I saw was an arm and a face. She was down a long, basically hallway of 10-foot granite on either side, just about shoulder width apart. 10 feet up and 10 feet back, where all we saw was her face and her right arm kind of coming through the rocks. And, at that point, I couldn't see the rest of her body because from that point, there's about a 30-foot boulder around her with a couple drop-off points to the other side where her right body was basically slid between that 10-foot piece of granite, but on this side is just about a foot wide.
Wow, okay.
And on that side, all we could see was just the shoulder and the arm. So from there, we kind of had to get our crews to both sides. We had contact on the west side down what I call the granite hallway. Then the rest of the crews negotiated their way over that 30-foot drop, big boulders, back up to her. And they had that access point where we actually got her out from. We, by that point, HTR started to come up, and they went above her to look down to maybe anchor, put some sort of sling or something to maybe pull her out the same way that she came. But she basically slid down the 10 feet and then wedged herself with her right leg kind of under her, so that she was just tippy toes on one side. Her right leg was kind of wadded up below her.
In terms of treatment, Lieutenant Spain, and safety considerations for that type of scenario, I know you're well versed in this kind of training and rescue. What considerations would you have when you're trying to treat a patient in that position?
So particularly in that wilderness environment, you're going to have to plan on just the access, the elements, the basic things we take for granted, chapstick, all that, being cold, warmth. You have to plan for that for yourself and her. But then on these events, now you're going to be with this patient. I think we were with her a total of like 6.5 hours that we had to render care during that time. So prolonged transport time, you have to deal with that. But then crevasses bring in a unique conundrum of everything for medical. And versus gaining access to it, I think you had very difficult access to the leg. Like the potential injured leg was behind her in that restricted area. So you can't treat that very well. But then also you have the environment, the cold, the hypothermia, and the big one that comes in this crevice-style rescue is that as the more she wiggles, the tireder she gets, she slides more and more and more down. And that actually creates a physical constriction, which is then a respiratory problem or a ventilation problem that you can't physically expand the container. So it's important, and they got in there, they held her up, they started anchoring her from the top so that she wouldn't go down into this wedge anymore. So it's very important to make sure that the patient stays awake, they stay strong, they're supported, and we make sure that she keeps that mental state where she can be a part of her rescue. and not necessarily just succumb because of anxiety or tiredness, because we need her to be proactive throughout this one.
Outstanding points. Thank you. So you're not going to be able to get any type of initial assessment other than that. You've kind of got her in a position where she's safe, usually the HTR crews, to kind of help harness her so you can at least initiate some sort of treatment. Can you talk through us, without having those initial vital signs, what level of treatment you were able to provide and why?
It was kind of limited right then and there. And, you know, we talked about the environment. We could get a radial pulse with that arm kind of reaching through. So she was cold. She was cold. Her respiratory was fine. She was speaking, you know, in full sentences. She was anxious as all get out, had a history of anxiety on top of it. No blood pressures or anything along those lines. I mean, that's neither here nor there. And so we just kind of went to basics at that point. I mean, can we warm her up? She's between two slabs of granite, cold granite. Wind is coming through the granite hallway, through the little hole that she's in. So she's only getting more cold. And I think fatigue was really, you know, setting in and did over those next 4 to 6 hours. And so all we could really, you know, do for access was driver Elcock was able to get an IV. That became our med route. I don't really think that we could start warming her, you know, unless we had, you know, multiple bags of fluid that we could wrap hot packs around and, you know, go from there. But it wasn't going to buy us too much because she needed to be removed from that environment. And so we just kind of stabilized and went from there.
So the IV was started, and then you were thinking pain control?
INT.
INT was started, okay. And then just for pain control and med route?
Yeah.
What medication did you opt to use?
So our first line, and we did have a discussion because driver Elcock was doing a lot of the hands-on because she was the only one small enough to kind of squirrel her way in there. And we were talking fentanyl, Versed. We opted in with the Versed. With a history of anxiety, with you know, her current position that she is, you know, found in, we thought that would be the best. We put 5 milligrams on board, and we had our desired effect of, you know, chilling her out, but that did decrease her respiratory drive, her ability to stand on that tippy toe, and at that point she kind of slumped.
And you talked about that, Lieutenant Spain, just to keep her physiologically, keep her awake, and just how she's going to start to automatically slide the more she tries to get out of there. Then when you administer a medication that's going to be like a sedative, talk about briefly, if you can, how that affects the patient care and that removal.
Yeah, so good thing you guys stabilized her on that one. So that she went there and she went down. She didn't constrict enough that she was physically restricted in her breathing after that event. So it's when we give those drugs that we got our desired effect, but in the mountains, it's one of those things you really can't take back and you have to deal with. So
and that was
always
a new
think
one
what
for
else
me.
that comes. Yeah, and why would you think of that, right? Like this is a new problem. This is why we're here today. But just what's the effect? What's the side effects? What else can come with this? How can it make my problem better or worse? Yeah. And then just always be prepared. You guys had a BVM in case you had to breathe for her and all that good stuff. So
I don't know how we're going to fit it in there.
Yeah, exactly. But woof.
Yeah,
it's a predicament. So just really thinking ahead on those steps. And just like we said, to start these events, they're a little bit slower. And same thing with that. Bounce it off friends, phone friends. And when we get into the additional resources, I phoned a lot of friends on this call while you guys are out there getting it done.
And speaking of additional resources, it sounds like you did have consortium on scene, and they were there.
Yeah, they made their way up there after we packaged the patient, which was nice.
They have a complement of medications that are in addition to ours. Did you guys utilize anything out of their cache to help treat the patient?
Yeah, we used 3 rounds of ketamine.
Okay.
Which once again, produced a desired outcome. But at that point, she had been packaged. This was for the descent down, and we were able to utilize that access point that we got on scene and went from there.
And that's consortium having them on scene, we know, and probably there was a discussion I think in this case, thankfully we were able to extricate her from that crevice, but there was discussion or at least thought in terms of maybe field amputation and how that would look on the consortium side. Was that discussed at all?
There was some discussion. I don't think that was going to happen there. Because, and I get it. We've all, seen 127 hours, and, that seems like an obvious amputation. It was more of an impingement. It wasn't a crush. It wasn't anything along those lines. And, without ruining anything, how we actually got her out was on that other access point. We were able to actually dig out under her so that she could extend that leg that had been impinged and kind of get herself to slide out with the crew's help and things along those lines. But the actual impingement was mainly her thigh. And to be able to get up and tourniquet and, everything along those lines, it didn't even seem an option at that point. Trust me, I haven't taken enough continuing ed classes to know exactly how to amputate something, but this didn't seem like a possibility. It was so high up that, even tourniqueting it would have been difficult. So
Sure.
It was more of a removal of the objects than to remove the object.
So starting to dig out, give you enough space to be able to remove and help her out of there. So how long in total were you there before you were able to get her actually physically removed?
Oh, that must have been about 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours. And that was really phoning a friend, talking options. We tried to lift her, especially when we had that decreased level of mentation. We're like, now's our time, yank, to try to get her up. But there was no moving up. There was no moving through that hallway. And it was mainly the practitioners that were down, I think HTR, Rescue 8, Engine 15. They actually saw what they needed to do and started digging. And it was amazing to watch how fast they moved that much debris. Initially, that wasn't an option that we were thinking, remove objects. And trust me, it crossed all of our minds that we're removing rocks with tons of granite around us. Like, what's going to give? Is it going to be the little rocks to give access to swing her legs around, or is it going to be the 10-ton granite leaning on us? But that seemed to be the only way to get her out, and it was successful. Somebody brought a Halligan, which in hindsight, when they came up and they had a Halligan, it's like, what are they going to be doing with this? Like as a wedge or something to move. But that became a digging tool, and everybody was able to dig enough to kick that leg out and to get her out and get her packaged.
Outstanding job. So we were able to get her removed. Her presentation was stable. Once you were able to get her removed, repeat vitals we were able to take. She was vitally stable. We were able to transport her to the hospital. Any significant injuries?
Oh, just like that. Just bing, bang, boom.
Yeah,
just
it's a short
she was
podcast,
out.
so I had to make sure that we show
no,
how talented
even
you are.
that. That's when we started actively rewarming her. We got her into the Stokes basket. We were able to use space blankets. Another thing that open space used, like a little bivy sack, bivy, and then blankets and things along those lines. We had her packaged and ready to go, but that access point on the east side of the boulder, there was the low angle descent would have been too rough. And so we actually had her packaged by time Spain made it up there. And we were going to do some unorthodox moves to get her across. And we slowed it up one more time to make it the safest route possible.
Sure.
I mean, at that point, you're looking at your crews. They're fatigued. They've been up there 3 or 4 hours. They're ready to go. And, you know, to my dismay, it was time to, you know, slow things down and go safe, because at that point we had to get her across a 30-foot drop off. I don't know the technical term, but it was a really long 30-foot drop off that I was concerned about the safety of the operators around there, just falling into that, because it was a significant drop. But then that's kind of when HTR SARS made contact, and they were able to produce a really great high line to get her over that drop, and then do a low angle, like 3 or 4 different low angle things at that point to get her down. And so, and then lickety split, we were done.
Yeah.
2 more hours later.
Yeah.
And so
Fantastic work.
Yeah.
So in closing, I kind of want to just talk about, and great job, by the way, and Lieutenant Spain, we touched on this a little bit earlier, was that 16s, 8s, 3s, typically well-versed in a lot of these processes, who to contact. With the CAD integration, P1 CAD, when it goes live, the hope is that will be built around when these calls come out. Those are the priority stations that will come out to these calls. However, until that point, or if something else happens and we have a crew who's not typically dispatched on those, can you talk briefly on what they should expect as far as calling out for additional resources when they go to those sorts of rescues?
Just like what Brent was doing on this one and those initial responding officers, standard operations, a little bit slower, and then ask for those resources. Put 8s and 16s in the queue, sit there and have them say, as soon as they clear that, send them our direction. We have the HTR task force. And then also after that, we like to use wildland stations to deploy. And part of the reason for that is we still have to maintain ALS and fire suppression tactics throughout the city. Yeah. So we can't create big voids in the city. So this allows us to disperse those. Also, this rescue was great because we had a bunch of joint partners that helped us out with it. So APD Open Space came out, BCSO MCAT unit, County 35, or actually County 46 joined us with their drone program as well, and their mountain rescuers. So there are the resources that come in, and then New Mexico's SAR, which is the Department of Public Safety, brought in, I think, about 30 additional mountain rescuers and volunteers throughout the state that helped out as well.
Okay.
So those are the resources that are there to us. And from the beginning, while these guys were working, I started hearing the way it's going. I phoned a lot of friends, and the department has allowed the technical rescue program to venture in and make points of contact through outside training. So one of those was the NCRC, the National Cave Rescue Commission, which we had made contact with to find out about what you said, digging and prying. Yeah. They call that passage modification.
Oh, yeah, of
So
course.
they said, cool, here's some miners with explosives.
That's what we're doing.
And here's some other people's with small micro-blasting charges that if this goes till tomorrow, we'll come in and we'll start doing that. And it's one of those things that's great. Take a moment after this to go look at some crevasse rescues out there. Nutty Putty is a famous one from Utah, and there's plenty more that show you that these could be 3-day events.
Absolutely. It's incredible. And just for quick access, alarm room our crew should go through alarm room to get those resources rolling, get your expertise involved, or should they call you directly?
Either are great options. The alarm room is enabled on some of those. There's a lot of changes in our local system recently, so it may not be as efficient or effective as we'd like it to be. So my phone calls there, the special ops groups will help out with that. Alarm room will be on it as well. And then Bernalillo County Fire, they have great resources when you work with their East Commander, who's getting really good at handling all the mountain rescue events.
Outstanding.
Yeah, I think the rescues and engines heading up, stay warm, bring lighting, bring some food, water, all those things. And then start allocating your resources and putting them off to the appropriate people. Like command was probably speaking with you, alarm room, and I didn't want to worry about that. I wanted to get eyes on the patient and a reliable source of information, which is usually one of those first couple crews. I wanted to do a lot more hands-on care. I usually, do, but that wasn't, my role at that point. I had people working on that, but I could relay communication. So I didn't need to be in the thick of things. So I kind of stepped away and got a good radio area.
Brent, what you did on that one and the team was great. You tried the phone call, you tried the remote assessment.
Yeah.
We had a third-party caller that heard people screaming across the canyon. All right, I'm going to go light, fast, get in there, and get us reliable information.
Yeah.
And that was priceless in setting the tempo of all the needs for the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's what kept it under 6 or around 6 hours and not a full day rescue.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic work. I appreciate you guys taking the time to come and discuss it today. I think the patient care, we had a good outcome, and then the resources and having your expertise and your knowledge and your context, I think is what made this a success.
Oh, I
so
think
really appreciate you.
I think the biggest thing on that is the crews that responded, because I don't think any of us, signed up for it that day. There were reliefs, overtimes, things along those lines, but it was one of those situations that we responded. Everybody went above and beyond what they needed to do, and everybody was engaged with that, because I think everybody that was on that hillside honestly thought that she was going to perish up there. And everybody, between AFR and all the additional resources, everybody did a remarkable job.
Excellent.
So,
You guys saved a life. Good job. That's all for today. We'll see you with the next episode of the AFR EMS podcast. If anybody has any recommendation for case studies, please submit them through SharePoint. And if there's questions, reach out to the EMS division. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
all right, thank you.